Colin Neath walked through the empty restaurant and thought the silence was deafening. He couldn't help but think about the busy atmosphere that once filled the space. Those times were such a luxury. He could vividly remember the sound of sizzling pans, the tantalizing aroma of freshly baked bread, and the gentle hum of conversation from satisfied customers. He stopped in front of the medium-sized kitchen, where he had spent countless hours perfecting his craft. The stainless steel counters seemed dull and lifeless, unlike before. Everything was once rosy and smooth, bringing him excitement every time. Colin's mind wandered to the remaining staff that he had just let go of about a week ago. He remembered how tears filled his eyes as he watched them walk out of the restaurant. He had promised them countless times that he would do everything to save the restaurant, but in the end, he couldn't. Colin's gaze fell upon the small supply of food he had left behind. He had planned to donate it to a shelter, but now he wondered if it was even worth the effort. He felt like he had failed everyone, his staff, his customers, and even himself. His gaze drifted across the street, his eyes fixed on the fast food restaurant that had been the final nail in his coffin. He couldn't help but feel a sense of irony as he stared at the neon lights and bustling crowd. They were serving the same tired burgers and fries that had become the norm, while his restaurant had offered something unique, something special. He remembered the countless hours he had spent perfecting his menu, sourcing the finest ingredients, and training his staff to provide exceptional service. He had been convinced that people would eventually get tired of the junk food and return to appreciating good food made with love and care. But that hadn't happened. Instead, the fast food restaurant had thrived, and his own business had suffered. Colin's mind wandered back to the moment he had discovered that his head chef, Alex, had been planning to leave. He had been neglecting the quality of the dishes, and Colin had been too blind to see it. He remembered the feeling of betrayal, the sense of disappointment that had washed over him when he had tasted the subpar food that had been going out to customers. He had confronted Alex, who had shrugged it off, saying that people didn't care about quality anymore. He had thought that he was offering something special, something that would make a difference. But in the end, it seemed that he had been wrong. People didn't care about good food. They cared about convenience, about speed, about cheapness. After heaving a sigh, he finally pulled out a chair from one of the tables and sat. He couldn't continue reminiscing about past events for long. If he did, the present and future would eventually amount to nothing. There were two options left on his mind. It was either he rented out the place or eventually sold it out. He needed money as it was because he had taken out a loan when the fast food place opened, not wanting to be on the receiving side of the blow. There was no running from that anymore. It happened exactly the way he had dreaded it. The restaurant was a total mess, with the floor littered with several cartons of raw food and the likes. There was a huge possibility that he would have to hire someone to clean it up if he wanted to attract potential buyers. Groaning in frustration, he checked his right side pocket for his phone and began scrolling through the internet, looking for some sort of way to get his mind off the whole issue. But it was as if he was just deceiving himself thinking that way. It didn't take long before he placed the phone on the table a bit hard. Feeling the need to get fresh air and get away from the building, he walked towards the back door, dangling his keys. Colin hadn't taken more than 10 steps into the alley behind the restaurant when he spotted them. A woman and her daughter, huddled together against the cold, their thin coats offering little protection from the biting wind. The woman's head snapped up as she heard his footsteps, her face a mix of fear and guilt. She scrambled to her feet, pulling her daughter up with her, the child's small hands gripping her mother's coat, as if it were the only thing anchoring her in the world. "I'm so sorry," the woman stammered, her voice trembling as she looked up at Colin, her eyes wide with panic. "We didn't know the restaurant had closed. The waitresses, they used to help us out." Her words came out in a rush, as if she expected to be turned away any second. The little girl beside her clung to her mother's leg, her eyes hollow, too exhausted even to cry. Colin's heart clenched at the sight. The sharp lines of his face softened, and he took a slow step forward. his hands outstretched in a gesture of reassurance. "It's okay, really," he said gently, trying to ease the fear in her eyes. "I understand. The restaurant's been closed for a few days, but I might still have something left in the kitchen. Let me check." The woman nodded, biting her lip as tears welled up in her eyes. "We haven't eaten all day," she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know where else to go. I'm sorry, we didn't mean to bother you." Hey, Colin interrupted softly, shaking his head. "You're not bothering me, not at all. Stay here for a minute. I'll see what I can find." He turned and hurried back inside the restaurant, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. As he moved through the kitchen, his eyes scanned the shelves, the counters, searching for anything that could help. The place was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual bustling energy it used to hold. After a few minutes of rummaging, he managed to gather a small bag of vegetables and a few fruits that hadn't spoiled yet. When he returned to the alley, the woman and her daughter were still there, waiting anxiously. Colin handed the bag to the woman, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, it's not much," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But it's all I have left." The woman's hands trembled as she took the bag, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the bag to her chest as if it were a lifeline. "Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to us." Colin felt a lump form in his throat. "It's the least I could do," he replied quietly, his gaze lingering on the little girl who was now peeking out from behind her mother, her eyes wide with curiosity and hope. "Oh, thank you so much. You've already done more than enough for us," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly as she forced a smile. "We are so grateful." Colin returned the smile, though something inside him stirred uneasily. "It's really nothing, just a little help. I'm glad I could offer it." As they turned to leave, Colin hesitated. "Are you sure you don't need a ride? I've got my car right here. It's no trouble at all." The woman's eyes darted around, searching for an answer, her hand gripping her daughter's a little tighter. "No, really, we're fine. Our apartment isn't far. We can walk. You've already done more than enough." The little girl looked up at Colin with a smile so pure it nearly broke his heart. "Mum's right, sir. We'll be just fine. Thank you." Colin glanced at the worn clothes hanging off their thin frames and the small, overstuffed bag clutched tightly in the woman's hand. Something about the way the girl's smile didn't reach her eyes made his chest ache. That smile, it was a mask, a fragile facade hiding a truth too painful for someone her age to bear. "Really, I don't mind at all," Colin pressed gently. "It's getting late, and it's not safe for you to be walking around alone." The woman's face tightened, her mask of composure cracking just slightly. He could see the gears in her mind whirring frantically, trying to piece together a response that wouldn't betray her. No, I couldn't ask for more. You've already been so kind. I'd hate to inconvenience you." She quickly tugged her daughter closer, the little girl's tiny hand slipping from Colin's view as they bowed their heads in gratitude, and then, almost as if they were fleeing, they hurried away. Colin stood there, watching them go, the weight of their unspoken truth pressing down on him like a stone in his chest. "Excuse me, Mom," Colin called out, his voice cutting through the whistling wind. The woman and her daughter turned slowly, almost as if they expected this moment but feared what would come next. Colin's heart ached as he watched the little girl clutch her mother's hand tightly, her small frame shivering from the cold. He sighed heavily, glancing around at the deserted street, the howling wind making the empty city feel even more desolate. His gaze returned to the mother and child, the way they stood huddled together, their thin coats barely providing any warmth. He noticed the way the woman's eyes flickered with something more than just exhaustion. Was it shame? Fear? Whatever it was, it gnawed at him. Colin's suspicions gnawed at him, an uneasy feeling settling in his chest. They weren't going back to their apartment. He knew it, could sense it in the way they hesitated, the way they looked at him as if they had nowhere else to turn. And in that moment, something inside him cracked. He didn't know their full story, but he didn't need to. He could see enough in the way the woman's shoulders drooped, in the way the little girl's eyes had lost the sparkle children's eyes should have. The woman opened her mouth as if to say something, but words failed her. She only nodded, waiting for whatever he had to offer or for him to send them away. Colin took a deep breath, the weight of what he was about to say settling heavily on his heart. Do you know how to clean? Colin asked, his voice gentle, almost hesitant, but with a thread of hope woven through the words. He wasn't sure where the question had come from. It had bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, driven by a need to help, to offer something more than just a bag of food. The woman blinked, her face a mixture of confusion and a flicker of hope that she desperately tried to tamp down, as if afraid to believe that someone might actually be offering a lifeline. She looked at her daughter, who gazed up at her with wide, questioning eyes, then back at Colin. "Clean?" she echoed, her voice trembling slightly. The woman stood there and almost stumbled as the question seemed to catch her off guard. Her grip tightened around her daughter's small hand, as if it were a lifeline. "Of course I do," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Any woman should be able to." Colin nodded, a warm smile softening his expression. "That's good to hear. The restaurant needs a good cleaning, and I could really use the help. In exchange, you and your daughter can stay here, safe and warm. I'll even let you use whatever's left in the fridges to make something to eat." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between Colin and her daughter. The offer seemed too good to be true, and for a moment, fear flickered in her eyes, as though she was searching for the catch, the hidden cost. Her daughter, however, tugged at her hand with a sudden burst of enthusiasm, her young face lighting up at the prospect. "Mum, please," the girl whispered, her voice filled with hope that was too innocent to be ignored. The woman looked down at her daughter, seeing the spark of life in her eyes that had been dimmed for too long. She then turned back to Colin, her eyes brimming with a mix of desperation and reluctant gratitude. It was as if a crushing weight was lifted from her shoulders, and she finally exhaled the breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Okay," she said, her voice breaking with relief. "Thank you. We'll do our best." "Let me show you around then," Colin offered, stepping aside to let them in. As they stepped inside, the woman's anxiety flared again. She glanced around nervously, her mind racing for an excuse, an escape route. But when her daughter tugged at the hem of her worn dress and looked up at her with pleading eyes, the last of her resistance crumbled. "Mum, please," the girl repeated, and in that moment the woman knew she couldn't say no. The air inside the restaurant was cool, the silence almost too loud. Colin took his time explaining everything that needed to be done, but his mind was elsewhere, tangled in his own worries. He stopped at the entrance, turning to look at the woman as she tried to absorb everything he was saying. "I didn't catch your name," he said, breaking the silence. The woman flinched as though she had been caught off guard again. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm Linda, and this is my daughter, Jennifer." Colin smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. As he stepped out of the restaurant, his mind raced with questions about the work that needed to be done, the state of the restaurant, and now about Linda and Jennifer. How long could he keep them here? What would happen to them when the restaurant, his last refuge, had to be sold to settle the bills that were piling up? He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of too many burdens pressing down on him. And now Linda and Jennifer were part of that weight, a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but couldn't turn away from. Linda placed the comfy blanket over the makeshift bed that was in one of the rooms in the restaurant. It was likely that the workers would normally use it if they were running night shifts. "Jenny, are you done? It's already past your bedtime." Jennifer mumbled something as she walked into the room, her hair dripping with water. She saw the look of disapproval on her mother's face and smiled. "Mum, it's just water." "That would drip all over if you don't wrap it up soon," Use this. She stretched a towel to her daughter and waited till she dried her hair thoroughly before tucking her in bed. "Mum," Jennifer called out as her mother kissed her goodnight. "Yes, sweetie." "I love you." Linda smiled, looking at her daughter, all loved up. "I love you more. Good night." She walked back to the main restaurant area and took a seat, trying to clear her head. It wasn't always like this for her. She lived such a good life. She was married, happy, and fulfilled. She'd wake up each morning feeling refreshed and happy to go about her day. But things started to happen, and her life took a devastating turn. She woke up one morning to hear the news that the housing market had crashed and the mortgage industry would let go of a lot of people. It was so shocking to her that it took a while before she could even get herself together. To make matters worse, her husband abandoned her and their 2-month-old baby girl. She was left with no income, and the little she had saved up wasn't up to anything substantial. It was her responsibility to take care of her child. Despite everything that happened, she did everything on her own, not relying on anybody for help. However, their situation became increasingly dire, and they eventually found themselves homeless, bouncing from one place to another. Linda took on odd jobs to provide for Jennifer, but she faced constant harassment and abuse from co-workers and even some women. Their life was a constant struggle, with Linda fighting to protect her daughter from the harsh realities of their situation. When Jennifer turned 3, Linda landed a job as a dishwasher in a restaurant kitchen. She found solace in the work she was doing. Doing that job brought in money to take Jennifer to daycare and keep some for later. But fate had other plans. When the sous chef fell ill, Linda was asked to assist the person in charge at that time. She did her work with all that she had in her, giving it her best. The chef in charge at that time gave her all the teaching she needed to know while cooking, even though she was just assisting him. What she didn't know was that not everyone smiling at her had good intentions for her. One day, while leaving work, Linda was caught with a bag of food, which she claimed were leftovers and discarded items. Despite her protests, the manager accused her of theft and fired her on the spot. She still wondered till this very time if she had offended the man in any way that made him react that way towards her. Jobless and desperate, Linda and her daughter soon returned to the streets, facing more dangers than she thought would happen. Several times she had been attacked and robbed, leaving her with nothing of importance. There was a time that she was attacked and got injured on her right leg, which resulted in her limping. It had been a long, exhausting day for Linda and Jennifer. They wandered the streets, stomachs growling with hunger. Jennifer, with her youthful energy and innocence, spotted the restaurant. Her eyes lit up with the possibility of a meal, and before Linda could react, Jennifer started to run towards it. "Wait, Jennifer!" Linda called out, grabbing her daughter's arm just in time. "We can't just barge in and ask for food. It's not right." Jennifer looked up at her mother, confusion and desperation mixing in her eyes. "But Mama, I'm so hungry," she whispered. Linda knelt down beside her, pulling Jennifer close. "I know, sweetie, I'm hungry too. But we have to be respectful." They stood by the side of the building, unsure of what to do next. The aroma of freshly cooked food wafted through the air, making their stomachs churn even more. Just as Linda was about to suggest they move on, the door to the restaurant opened, and an elderly man stepped out. He had a warm smile with kind eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. His hair was white as snow, and his posture spoke of both strength and gentleness. "Are you two all right?" he asked in a voice that was soft but filled with concern. Linda hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but before she could say anything, the old man continued. "You're hungry, aren't you?" Linda nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. She didn't want to beg, but the truth was undeniable. The man smiled again. "Follow me, but not through the front door. Meet me around the back." Linda and Jennifer exchanged glances, then quickly made their way to the other side of the building. As they rounded the corner, they saw the old man already waiting for them. He held out a large bowl filled with mashed potatoes and chicken, steam still rising from the food. Jennifer's eyes widened as she accepted the bowl, and Linda felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you. Thank you so much," Linda stammered, her voice trembling with emotion. The man waved it off as if it were nothing. "My name's Mr. Harrison," he said. "You don't need to thank me. Just promise me you'll come back if you're ever hungry again. Even if I'm not here, the girls inside know to help you." Linda and Jennifer grew to know Mr. Harrison better. He would always greet them with a smile, a warm meal, and words of comfort. He became a beacon of hope for them in a world that often seemed bleak. That was how everything came to be for her. One day, after they had finished their meal, Mr. Harrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden amulet. It was shaped like a star, with a tiny gemstone set in the center. "Jennifer," he said, handing the amulet to her, "I made this a long time ago. I want you to have it. It's said to protect you from bad things." Jennifer's eyes lit up as she took the amulet, holding it carefully in her small hands. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she whispered, clutching the amulet close to her heart. Mr. Harrison placed a gentle hand on her head, his eyes full of affection. "You're a brave girl, Jennifer. This world can be tough, but you have a strong spirit. This amulet is just a little something to help keep that spirit safe." That was the last time they saw Mr. Harrison. It wasn't just the food they needed, it was his warm presence that drew them back. They missed him. One day, Linda gathered the courage to ask one of the other waitresses about him. The woman explained that he hadn't been feeling well recently, and he had just left without saying anything. They didn't even know where he lived. Despite the uncertainty, Linda and Jennifer kept returning, like loyal dogs, hoping to find Mr. Harrison back at work. But each time they came, he was nowhere to be found. Then, that windy afternoon came, and Linda's heart sank when she arrived at the restaurant, only to find it completely deserted. And now she stood in the empty restaurant that had nourished them in more ways than one, and was preparing it for the sale. She rose to her feet, stretching her hands by raising them in the air for half a minute, before retreating to the kitchen to get a cloth to wipe all the tables. That was the only thing that she would do that wouldn't wake up her sensitive daughter. She wasn't even done cleaning them when she began to fight yawns. Her leg began to throb with dull pain, which only came when she spent too much time standing. Before she and Jennifer came to the restaurant, they had been to the shelter as usual to see if they could get somewhere to just lay their head, but they only wasted their time again. Linda didn't want her daughter to be used to going from one place to another just to find food and still struggle to get a place to stay. Life wasn't so good to them. "Well, this place is like an answered prayer," she mumbled to herself as she grabbed one of the blankets she found in one of the rooms and placed it on the floor just by her daughter's feet and allowed herself to respond to the darkness. The days passed by quickly and easily, and Colin finally returned to the restaurant. He noticed as he stood outside waiting for the door to be opened that something had changed. Immediately, he stepped his foot inside the restaurant. He couldn't believe his eyes one bit. Jennifer, who had opened the door for him, gave him a little smile as she led him to the table where they were having a meal. The aroma that was sizzling around the room was a pure heavenly sensation. Linda immediately rose to her feet, smiling warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. Would you like to join us?" Colin hesitated. "No, I'm okay, thanks. Just wanted to check on the progress, and please, I prefer you call me Colin rather than sir." Linda nodded slowly as she took her seat and resumed eating while sharing a glance with Jennifer. Colin stood just by their table watching as the tables were neatly cleaned and decorated with tablecloths. Tablecloths that he didn't remember getting. "Where did you get all the tablecloths from? I don't even recall getting them at all." Linda looked up from what she was eating. "We found them in the storeroom, alongside some other things." He nodded, feeling revived in such a neat environment. His eyes continued to stray towards the food that they were eating. The delicious smell wasn't letting him stay calm one bit. "That smells incredible, by the way," Linda chuckled. "Just something I whipped up. Want to try?" His stomach growled in return, shocking Colin and making Linda and Jennifer laugh. Linda stood to her feet and went into the kitchen, limping. Some minutes later, she emerged with a dish and placed it on the table where they were sitting. Colin tried not to look like he was rushing to get the food, but the aroma didn't let that happen. He took a bite and his eyes widened at the goodness of what he was eating. The flavors danced on his palate, leaving him completely speechless at first. "This is... wow!" Colin exclaimed. "What's the dish?" "Just a little something I came up with," Linda smiled knowingly. "If you like the dish, you'll love the soup. They're a perfect pair." "Can I get that, please?" Jennifer stood up to get it for him this time. She knew how difficult it was for her mother to walk sometimes. She was back in no time and she gave it to Colin, who was ready to dig in. Colin took a spoonful of the soup and his eyes widened again. "Outstanding. You're a talented cook." "It's nothing. I just got the opportunity to do something with the little food that was here." "That's not it," Colin countered, gulping down the remaining soup left in the bowl. "You have that talent. Most chefs believe that cooking is just adding ingredients, but it's more than that, and you know that it is." Linda smiled, tapping on Jennifer's arm to start to pack the dishes away from the table. Colin made her feel like she had something big, but in truth it was nothing at all. Colin closed his eyes, wanting to relieve this sensation again. What would have happened if he had come in contact with her earlier? When the head chef left, he tried to make all the best dishes he could, but the customers weren't coming anymore. They had lost them already. But if he had Linda then, it would have changed everything. That was one thing that he was sure of at the time. He stayed for an extra hour just to keep the duo company and also to explain that buyers would be coming to check out the place soon and that the place was already good as it was. And just as he said, 4 days later, a group of men were led into the restaurant by Colin, who was polished up real good. Linda had told Jennifer to remain inside until they were done. She would have been inside with Jennifer, but Colin had requested that she join him so that he wouldn't just do it all alone. As the group began their tour, a man had his gaze locked onto Linda, who volunteered to show the men around. Colin noticed that Linda did all she could to avoid the man's gaze too. He sensed that something was amiss, but he couldn't place a finger on what it was exactly. "I'm telling you, this place is a lost cause," the man suddenly blurted out, as if it was to be out right there. "The kitchen's outdated, the decor's tacky, it's not worth your investment. I'm sure we can get something marvellous with our budget, rather than this." The man looked around as if he was scared that the building would just collapse. "Who's that?" Colin whispered to one of the bank representatives. "That's Tom Harris, one of our consultants." Colin's hackles rose as Tom continued to disparage the restaurant. "That's not true," Colin interrupted. "We've recently renovated the kitchen, and the decor has character." Tom's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," he snapped. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that. Why don't you let them decide if they want the building or not? I have to give them my advice, you know. This building is a mistake that would only bring trouble to anyone that buys it." "What's going on here?" one of the potential buyers asked, sensing the tension. Tom's smile was venomous. "Just pointing out the flaws in this establishment." The men exchanged confused looks amongst themselves, not fully understanding what Tom was saying. "Please, gentlemen, let's continue, please." Linda's soft voice brought their attention back to the tour she was giving. Colin shot her a grateful look before bringing his attention back to the man who had caused the distraction, and saw that the man also had his eyes on her. "This place would be in need of a whole lot of remodeling, and that would cost more. As I said before, it's already so outdated." "Do you have a problem with this place? Ever since you've come here, you have not bothered to see anything good here," one of the men finally asked, getting tired of what his colleague was doing. "What do you mean by that?" "Mum?" Jennifer emerged from where she was staying, rubbing her sleepy closed eyes. All attention was directed at the little girl, but it was more for Tom Harris, who had his mouth agape, looking at the uncanny resemblance between the girl and himself. She had his cool blue eyes, pointed nose and calm smile. For a moment, he forgot where he was and felt like running over to hug her. "Sweetie, please just go in for the time being. I'd call you out after." The group decided to use that time to have their discussions on what to do, so they all went to the far end of the restaurant. Colin noticed Linda's intense stare was fixed on the group, and he didn't understand why. "Linda, is everything okay?" Linda's eyes slowly began to well up with tears. She had waited till Jennifer had gone inside before she let out a word. "It's nothing, Colin. Don't mind me." "Don't say that. You are even about to cry. Tell me what's going on." "I just get our things, Colin. Thank you so much for your help." "My help? You are getting on my nerves now. Why are you in a rush to leave? Don't I deserve some sort of explanation?" Linda sighed, putting her right hand on her head. "The man who is trying to cause a commotion now?" Colin nodded, expecting more. "He is Jennifer's father, the man who abandoned us when she was only 2 months old. This is the first time I'm seeing him, after all these years looking all posh and good. I guess he's living a pretty cool life." Colin was about to speak again when he heard feet shuffle behind him. "I think we've seen enough," one of the men finally said, looking at his colleagues for confirmation. "This place is so good, especially for what we want to use it for. However, there are some things that would need to be changed entirely. We don't want to spend a fortune on that either. Thank you." Without another word, the group turned and left the restaurant, leaving Colin and Linda pretty shocked. "Everything was going well. I'm sure that it's that son of a—" "Don't let your anger lead you to call him names now. In fact, it's a good thing that they don't want it." Linda took a step back, and the tears that she had managed to keep reined in, rushed out. "I'm so sorry, it's all my fault. If I wasn't here at all, Tom wouldn't have tried what he did." "What are you saying, Linda? Please stop crying. You had nothing to do with it." He tried comforting her, but it seemed that everything he did only made her cry more. "Mum, why are you crying?" Jennifer rushed to her mum's side, confused as she glanced at Colin, hoping to understand. "I was too selfish, wasn't I? I'm sure to carry problems wherever I go, right? I'm so sorry." She held Jennifer tight and continued to cry. Colin shook his head, realizing she wouldn't stop crying. "I've made up my mind. I'm not selling the restaurant." "What? Why?" "Because of you, Linda. Your cooking, your passion. It reignited something within me. We can save this restaurant together." Linda's eyes widened as Colin's words sank in. "Start from scratch," Colin continued. "New menu, new atmosphere. We'll make it work." That same day, Colin and Linda sat down, poring over the new menu. Linda's enthusiasm was infectious. She had long cleaned her tears and told Jennifer, who was still confused, that there was nothing to worry about. "I learned so much from my time in the restaurant," she explained. "I know what works, what doesn't." Colin nodded, impressed. "You're a natural. I'm sure that all will be well. We have to choose a date to reopen, though. I was thinking next week. What do you think?" "I think that's good." Linda wrote something down, nodding. "That would give us enough time to restock and also get this place looking good." They continued to work on everything until the sun began to set. Colin, a bit tired but excited about the progress made, started turning off the light. "Jennifer," he called out to the girl, who rushed to his side. "Do me a favor by getting your bags. Let's go home." Linda automatically swung her head to his side, wondering what he meant by home. "Home?" "Yes, home. I'm sure you don't want to stay here again, sleeping on makeshift beds that are uncomfortable. I'm already in your debt for what you have done for me. This feels like it's too much. We are really okay with this place. I want you and Jennifer in my home, Linda." "But it's not right. I don't want to make you feel inconvenienced in your own home. Don't worry, we'll go back to the shelter." Colin smiled, moving closer to Linda, who had an unreadable expression on her face. "Never for once have I complained, Linda. Just get your things, I'd be waiting in the car." Colin made his way to his car, smiling as he couldn't stop thinking of everything that was in place to reopen the restaurant. In fact, he never thought of it until the group started their discussions earlier. When they did, it was just like a push, combined with Linda's cooking. It all fell in place just at once. "Are you guys all done?" he asked, a still shocked Linda and a happy Jennifer. Both of them nodded, one eagerly, one slowly. "Give them to me. The doors are open. Let me just arrange this at the back and we'd get going." And that he did. Days leading up to the reopening of the restaurant was chaotic as it could be. Linda and Colin stayed up very late each night to sort out things that were needed. He would have gone to take another loan, but he was lucky enough to have something substantial to be able to reopen again. Linda believed that he wouldn't need to even go to get another loan. She keyed into the vision that she saw him create. The days continued to pass by like flowing water, and soon enough the D-Day finally came. They had arranged everywhere, adding decorations, and even handmade artworks were hanging daintily on the walls. Colin had called back a few of the staff that were still eager to come back and explained how everything would be with their pay at the end of the month. The new menu, which took days to create, showcased Linda's creative mind. There were peculiar dishes like pan-seared scallops, wild mushroom risotto, and herb-crusted rack of lamb. "Ready?" Colin asked, adjusting his tie as they stood outside, nervous. Linda nodded, smoothing her apron. "As ready as we'll ever be." Inside the restaurant, the staff continued to make sure everything was okay. One of them made sure to check that all the napkins are neatly folded over and over again. Colin was able to get a sous chef to assist Linda in any way whatsoever, and one of the staff made sure that everywhere was neat and clean. At 11:02 a.m., the doors officially opened. The initial silence was unsettling. Linda tried to keep calm, but she couldn't stop her mind from racing. She feared that nobody would show up eventually. What if nobody shows up? Colin placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They will. Word of mouth, social media. We've done our part." 11:15, 11:30. Still nothing. Emma, one of the staff, checked her watch for the 10th time. "Is it always this slow?" Maria shrugged. "First day jitters, maybe." Just then the door swung open. A group of 4 walked in, 2 couples chatting and laughing. Maria's face lit up. "Welcome to our restaurant. Right this way, please." Emma sprang into action, leading them to a cozy table by the window. The group perused the menu, asking questions. "What's the special of the day? Do you have any vegetarian options?" Linda's eyes sparkled as she presented the daily specials. "Our grilled chicken sandwich is a favourite, and our vegetable quiche is made fresh in-house." The group ordered 2 grilled chicken sandwiches, 1 veggie quiche, and a bowl of creamy tomato soup. Not so long after, they were served and began to eat. Linda stood nervously by the kitchen door, trying to see their expressions, but she couldn't. "They loved it." Maria rushed, carrying the dishes into the kitchen. "I'm sure that they'd come again." "That was perfect," Linda whispered, placing her hand on her chest and smiling like she had just won the lottery. The phone rang, and Maria rushed to it and answered. "Reservations for 2 at 1 p.m. Linda's heart skipped a beat. It's happening. The day had begun, and it was going well already. The next few weeks became busier and busier each time. Linda was worried about how to go about everything and still have time for Jennifer. Colin had enrolled her for elementary school, and Jennifer was ecstatic. Every night before she'd go to bed, she'd recount everything that happened in school to her and Colin. So at the restaurant, there was a chance that they could even get better. She had gotten a lot of reviews on the food, and there were some complaints. Of course, she was expecting that. She wasn't perfect, and Colin did everything within his power to make everything easy for her. She believed that in life, everyone had a helper. She was sure that Colin was a godsend. Time after time, she questioned everything that had happened. If he didn't see her that day, she wouldn't even be dreaming of living a life like this. "Earth to Linda," Colin tapped her, startling her a bit. "I called your name twice, but it seemed that you were lost in thought." Linda turned, wiping sweat from her forehead. Oh, it happens sometimes, I guess. Colin leaned against the counter. We're expanding. The numbers are in, and we're doing better than expected. That's great, but I don't know if I can keep up. I'm already away from Jennifer too much. I understand. We can adjust the schedule. Make sure you have more time with her. Linda hesitated. It's not just that. I feel like I'm missing out on so much. Colin nodded thoughtfully. I have an idea. Why don't we hire a nanny to help with Jennifer? That way you can focus on the restaurant and still have quality time with her. Not a live-in nanny, though. I noticed you don't really like the idea of that. Smiling, Linda closed her eyes. You are a lifesaver, believe me. She opened her eyes and yawned lightly. What would I have done without you? You would still be the amazing woman that you are. He went on and opened the fridge, producing a chilled bottle of champagne. To celebrate our success and our future. Champagne? He popped the cork, pouring 2 glasses. To new beginnings. He handed Linda a glass and they clinked glasses before having a sip. As Linda sipped it, she felt the bubbles dancing on her tongue. It was her first time having champagne. She felt Colin's eyes on her as she sipped her champagne, and her cheeks involuntarily went pink, so she looked away. Focus, Linda. Focus. As she sipped the champagne again, she told herself that it was the champagne that was giving her the butterflies that she felt in her stomach, and it wasn't because of the way that Colin's eyes were fixated on her, but she knew deep down what it was that made her flush. At the end of the first month, Linda rushed into the house, waving her first paycheck in the air. Sweetie, come see something. She waited in the sitting room, half dancing, half singing. Guess what? I just got my first paycheck. We can finally get a place of our own. What do you think about that? She started saying as Jennifer walked towards her holding a book. Mom, why don't you tell him the truth? Linda's face flushed. What truth? That you don't really want to move out? There was a wide, mischievous smile on her face. You don't even have the heart to move out, Mum. Linda's discomfort was palpable. What in the world are you talking about? She shouted playfully, trying to deflect. Don't mind her, Linda. It's up to you both. If you want to move out, it's your decision. If you want to stay, well, that's your decision too. Colin emerged with a different bag of groceries. Really? Jennifer asked as she glanced at their expressions. Can you really let her out of your sight? Linda's blush deepened. Jennifer, stop teasing. Jennifer turned to her mom, grinning. You guys are grown-ups, come on, I'm not a baby. I know exactly what's going on between you guys. The room erupted into laughter. Colin's eyes met Linda's, and they exchanged a warm, conspiratorial glance. The tension that was between them was undeniable. A spark had ignited, and it was growing harder to ignore what it was. You're welcome to stay, Linda. Jennifer's right. It's your decision. Linda's heart fluttered. We'll stay, she smiled, looking directly into Colin's eyes. Jennifer whooped, throwing her arms around her mum. Yes, I get to keep my room. She gave her a kiss before collecting a bag of groceries from Colin, whilst doing something that resembled a victory dance. Colin and Linda couldn't help but laugh about what Jennifer had said. Yes, sweetie, you are right. But tell me, is there anything you want me to get you? A knitted sweater, that's what I want. Jennifer answered immediately from the kitchen, like she had been expecting the question all along. Linda sighed, satisfied by the answer that her daughter gave, and collected the remaining bag of groceries from Colin and went straight to the kitchen to start making dinner for everyone. As she worked, she couldn't stop smiling as she replayed the whole thing that happened in her head. Her daughter was such an intelligent little girl, only that she was not so little anymore. Day by day, she was becoming more and more mature before her very own eyes. Tom doesn't know what he is missing out on one bit. If he knew, I'm sure he would be so helpless, she murmured to herself, shaking her head. Looking back, things were hard at one point, but it eventually worked out for her and her daughter. What if Tom had found her when she was picking food from trash cans? Would she still be able to hold her head up high? Everything was going on well until one day that hell decided to let loose one of their men and sent him down to the restaurant. It was another afternoon and the restaurant was filled with people as it was rush hour. The aroma of freshly baked bread and roasting vegetables filled the air, enough to make someone's mouth water. Linda was assisting the staff to serve food, as she liked to do such sometimes. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Tom, Linda's ex-husband, strode in. His face was contorted in anger as he looked round the room, until his eyes found her. "Linda!" he bellowed, as soon as he spotted her. "How are you doing? I can see you are doing pretty well." Nah. Linda gently dropped the plates she was holding on the nearest empty table and looked around. "Tom, what are you doing here?" "I came to see my daughter. Where is she?" "Tom, please. Not here. Not now." Tom's face reddened. "You've been keeping her from me, Linda. After all these years, you expect me to just sit back while you don't even give me access to her. You think you can just take my daughter away?" Linda could feel the multiple uncomfortable stares that were all on them. The whole restaurant became so quiet that even she could hear her heart beating. "Tom, you have no right to show up here and cause a scene. You're a whore, Linda. You think you can just move on and forget about me?" The way Tom spoke made Linda want to crawl up somewhere and not show her face ever again. She hated that feeling with all her heart. "Do you even have a heart? Tell me, all these years you have hidden her away from me, and now she's growing up without a father. Just..." Someone grabbed his hand and yanked him away from Linda. Linda looked up from staring on the ground and saw that it was Colin. She shot him a thankful expression. "You're right, Tom. Jennifer is growing up without a biological father." He paused, his gaze locking onto Linda's. "But she has someone who can be a father to her." Linda's eyes sparkled as she felt the tears threaten to fall. "Who are you to..." Colin's voice cut through. "If you'll allow me, Tom, I'd like to finish this conversation outside." Tom sneered almost immediately, but after he looked around and saw how much attention was on him, he followed Colin out. Outside, he puffed out his chest. "You think you can intimidate me?" Colin's smile was disarming. "Not at all, Tom." He extended his hand. "Let's just have a civil conversation." Tom hesitated before shaking Colin's hand. As soon as their palms touched, Colin's grip tightened like a vice, and Tom couldn't help but wince. "You better stay away from them, Tom. If you come close to them again, I'm not going to shake your hand. I'll beat the shit out of you." Tom's eyes widened as all the blood drained from his face. Colin released his hand, still having a smile plastered on his face. "You are just a coward. Do well and stay away, just like you have done all these past years." With that, Tom took a step back and fled. When Colin returned inside, the atmosphere in the restaurant had returned back to normal, and he was grateful for that. He didn't see Linda serving anymore, so he knew where she'd be. "You don't need to hole up here. He's not here anymore, and he can't do anything to you." "Thank you," she whispered. "Anytime. I didn't see him walk in because I was on a call. If I had, he wouldn't have the opportunity to try anything." Jennifer stood and hugged Colin tightly. "I'm glad you're here." Days passed since Tom's explosive visit, but Linda's nerves still frayed. Every sudden noise made her jump. Every door swing made her shiver. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At the restaurant, she found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder. Colin noticed the subtle changes in her behavior and asked her constantly if she was all right. She always answered in the affirmative. "Something is wrong, isn't it? I noticed the way you aren't fully here anymore." Colin eventually spoke up after bottling up his words for days. "Even Jennifer is worried." "But I'm here." Colin ran his hand through his hair, a little bit frustrated. "He's not coming back, Linda, I guarantee you that. Please don't let him steal your life from you, even in his absence." Linda sighed, putting her hand on her forehead. She thought that she would be able to go on without him knowing. Every single time she heard someone open the door, she would think about what had happened that day. "I'm sorry. That day was just not my best of days, and unconsciously I went back there. Colin moved closer to her, putting his arms around her. It's not your fault. Don't think that way anymore. You had a child with him, but he was too weak of a man to stay and he backed out. You didn't back out. Not even one time. So why are you the one being affected? Please, Linda. Linda began to cry in his arms, thinking about what he had said. It wasn't the first time that she would think of it that way. It was only that she didn't want to think that way. It was clear that she only wanted to punish herself. Can we just stay like this for a while? She mumbled, holding him right. For as long as you want, we can stay. That's how the duo stayed there, with Colin holding her and Linda hanging on to him like he was like her last thread. Colin held her, hoping that at the end she would come back to how she was originally. That was his wish. Things became much better after that day. Linda was able to be at peace again. She was also able to sleep well. Colin had to make her reassure Jennifer that all was well with her without mentioning the whole Tom scenario. The man didn't even deserve the littlest recognition from her. As expected, the restaurant continued to do amazing each day. Colin was able to employ more hands because the workload was also increasing. The most favourite thing for Colin to do recently was to sit with Jennifer and Linda and just talk. He never knew such little things could be so important to him. One afternoon on the way home with Jennifer, who had just narrated how school went for her, Colin remembered that her birthday was coming soon. So, what do you want for your birthday? Another knitted sweater. He pointed to the knitted sweater that she asked Linda for. Jennifer's eyes sparkled with a glint. I want Mum to stop limping and hurting. I see the way she struggles to walk sometimes. She tries to mask it, but I still see it. Colin's heart melted. He hadn't expected that answer. He thought she'd ask for dolls, games, or a new bike. But this was something deeper. He took into account what she had said. He was glad that Jennifer took after her mother in countless ways, even more than he could count. As Jennifer noticed her mother's limping, that was something that he noticed too. He gave her more hands in the kitchen and even gave her comfortable chairs to sit on, but Linda could be stubborn sometimes. She'd forget about her health and focus on the job like her life depended on it. On her birthday, they cooked a delicious dinner at home. Colin gifted Jennifer dolls, books, and games for the birthday. He even made the meal himself because, as he told her, it was a very special day for her and she deserved the best. As they ate, Colin thought it wise to tell Linda about Jennifer's wish. Linda, do you know what Jennifer wants for her birthday? Linda looked up from her meal, still chewing food. I don't know. I remember her telling me it was something special, but she didn't reveal more than that. Colin shared a knowing look with Jennifer before speaking. Guess. She thought for a moment. A bike? No. A puppy? Colin shook his head as Jennifer grinned mischievously with a glint in her eyes. She was ready to hear what more she would say. Just tell me what it is, would you? Please. She turned all puppy-eyed on Colin. She wants you to stop limping and hurting. Linda's fork froze mid-air. Tears welled up and she grabbed her head, sobbing. Colin quickly rushed to her side and wrapped his hands around her, holding her close. Jennifer's smile faltered for a moment before she looked at her mom. Mom, don't cry. I just want you to be happy. We'll get you the best treatment. You'll be fine. Linda nodded, still sniffling. And Colin already made an appointment for her in one of the good hospitals in the area, so that was sorted out. Only one thing remained that bothered him, and he had to sort it out soon. That night, after the dishes were done, he sat with Linda, who had tucked a happy Jennifer in bed, with a glass of champagne. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? Linda glanced at him with confusion written all over her face. What do you mean? Don't I have dinner with you every day? She tutted. Well, I was thinking something Italian at that place that Maria talked about. Linda placed her cup gently on the table, smiling. Colin Neath, are you actually asking me on a date? If I called it a date, won't you freak out? Not if you are the one asking, though. Colin paused before nodding. My dear Linda, would you like to go on a date with me tomorrow? Well, Mr. Colin, it took you too long to ask, but of course I will. She leaned forward, smiling widely. As if on cue, Colin leaned forward, giving her a kiss on her lips. Would have done more than that, but I'm a gentleman. Linda gasped, putting her hand over her mouth with her blazing cheeks. You did not just do that. He chuckled, carrying his glass over to her side. Well, I did. He finally took the leap of faith. And it went well. He had thought that she'd not be even willing to give him any hearing opportunity. The next day, Colin was as nervous as a boy who was expecting his final year results. He wanted to look more presentable as it was their first date, but his wardrobe was filled with casual wear rather than corporate ones. He finally settled for a short-sleeve black shirt and a navy blue trouser. Checking his time, he waited outside for Linda to come. It was their first date, so it had to be worth it. It was then that she emerged from the house in a black dinner gown that showed her collarbone more, revealing a beautiful diamond necklace that he had gifted her days before. The night was young, and they were having the time of their lives eating at the Italian restaurant. Linda was shocked at how beautiful the place looked, with all the tables arranged in such an immaculate way. She thanked him for bringing her to such a beautiful place, and when he told her that it was just the beginning, she felt her cheeks flame up. Not for once did Tom ever take her out. It was either he was busy at work or he was too tired for such. She never thought that she'd even go out on such a date in her life. This chapter of her life was going to be fun. As time went by, their relationship continued to blossom each day. It took a lot of work on their part to make it work as they wanted. The months passed by quickly, and the restaurant even became bigger that Colin began to contemplate opening another branch soon. One evening after work, Colin had prepared dinner for Linda at the restaurant. He led her to the table where Jennifer had drawn on the napkin. The plate was on the napkin, so she didn't see anything. Do you remember the time we sat here together, discussing what to do to make the restaurant better for reopening? Linda nodded, smiling with love written on her face. I do remember. Ooh, this smells so nice. You can take the napkin from under the dish. And she did just that until she realized that something was written on the napkin. Her eyes quickly joined the words together, and before she could say anything, Colin dropped to one knee holding a small open box. Linda, will you marry me? With tears streaming down her eyes, she nodded, stretching out her hand for him to put the ring. As he did, she took a closer look at the gold ring that was as beautiful as she could imagine. The preparations for the wedding started as soon as they arrived home that day. Both of them didn't want a lot of people, so only the restaurant staff and a few friends were invited. As they prepared for the wedding, he remembered that there was one more person Jennifer wanted to share her birthday with, Mr. Harrison, the old waiter who used to work for Colin. Linda felt a wave of embarrassment as she prepared to tell Colin how they had first come to the restaurant and met Mr. Harrison. She hesitated before she explained the kindness the elderly man had shown them. When she mentioned the amulet Mr. Harrison had given to Jennifer, Colin's expression changed. His eyes widened, and without a word he stood up and quickly retrieved something from a nearby drawer. In his hand was an identical amulet, worn and cherished. Colin explained that before Mr. Harrison left his job, he had given him the same token of protection. The old man was a kind soul, Colin said softly, his voice tinged with sadness. He used to share the funniest stories, always trying to make everyone smile, even on the toughest days. Then, with a deep breath, Colin broke the news Linda had feared. Mr. Harrison passed away not long after he left the restaurant. I think he knew his time was short and wanted to leave something behind for those he cared about. Linda felt a lump in her throat as she processed the loss. The amulet now felt heavier in her hand, a final gift from a man whose kindness had touched their lives in ways she was only beginning to understand. After deliberating with Linda, he took both of them to the graveyard. Jennifer placed flowers on the old waiter's grave. "Thank you for being kind to us," she whispered. Linda's eyes welled as she remembered how the man helped her so much. It would be impossible to forget him. Colin's arm wrapped around her, comforting her. As they walked away, Jennifer looked up. "Mum, Dad, I'm happy he's in a better place." Colin smiled. "Me too, kiddo." Weeks passed by after that, and the wedding preparations had to come to a halt for D-Day. It was everything that Linda wanted. They only had a few guests and family members who were happy for them and their union. Jennifer was the happiest that day. She was glad that they were happy. In this story of struggles and perseverance, Jennifer stood out as the happiest of all. Despite her young age, the little girl had seen more hardship than most, yet she remained the strongest. Jennifer had an uncanny resilience, the kind that came from never losing her smile and always finding reasons to be grateful. She found joy in the smallest of things, cherishing the little victories they achieved along the way. While others might have been weighed down by the challenges they faced, Jennifer's spirit lifted them all, her laughter a constant reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still light to be found. One day, Colin dropped Jennifer off at school and she gingerly gave him a kiss before waving him goodbye. He watched her as she walked away and couldn't help but smile. Jennifer was now the proud big sister to her younger brother. Linda was now resting at the hospital with his handsome son. The night before brought about a smooth delivery, allowing mother and child to have the rest of their life. Life was good. Thank you for listening to this story. Please share your thoughts in the comments.